Hi, this is Irina Dumitrescu, and this is a presentation for my students on how to write. The tips that I'm going to give here are mostly quick fixes or little tricks that can help with the writing process. They're meant to respond to the situation we're in right now, where it's very hard to concentrate. We can't leave our homes very often. We don't have access to the libraries. And especially for anyone working on a larger project, it can be quite tricky to continue making progress on it. At the same time, the tips I'm going to describe apply to any time because writing is always difficult, even when things are perfect in the world outside. It's still actually a challenge to work on a longer project or even to get started on a shorter one. And I've meant this as help for academic writing, but a lot of the tips I have here could apply to other kinds of writing as well. Journalistic writing, creative, you name it. As long as it has something to do with writing, you can use these tricks. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly. I don't want to say too much about all the different strategies. I do think that it's worth trying a few of them, seeing if they work. Some of them are slightly longer term, some of them are quick fixes. And I suggest that you just see what appeals to you and give it a go, depending on what you're working with at this particular moment or what you're dealing with. So first, just some quick tips. If you really know you want to write that day, you've set aside some time, and you start to find yourself doing everything but actually writing. You're going on social media, you're checking Instagram, you've suddenly decided you need to clean your space really thoroughly and disinfect it all, whatever it is. The question is, how do you use the time that you have to actually write in it? One technique that's very popular with a lot of people is called the Pomodoro technique, or it's named that way because of the little tomato timers that people use. Sometimes I've looked into getting one of them, but they make a ticking noise that would frankly distract me. The idea is that you break up your time into manageable chunks. What's suggested usually is 25 minutes, and then you really focus on working for those 25 minutes. You don't check anything else. You don't do research. You don't check your email. You don't let yourself be interrupted. You just work. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, you take a break, something like a 5-minute break. After you've done a few of them, you can take a slightly longer break. You also have to take the break. You can't just keep going if you are doing well. Sometimes I like to keep going. But I think that the Pomodoro timer is a really great way to get started. And maybe you don't have any desire to keep on working on the thing after the 25 minutes, but you'd be amazed at how much you can do in 25 minutes. I've shown you a link on the slide. Tomato Timer is a website that will give you a timer like that, and you can change it. It's free. I'll put the link below the video as well. I also like to use this, frankly, for doing things like answering emails. When I realize I'm procrastinating a bit from answering my emails, I put on a timer and I try to see how many emails I can do in 25 minutes. Another trick that people use is to cover up their screen and write. I've actually never done it, but the idea there is that we tend to really activate our inner critic when we're writing, and that's even more true when we're writing on a screen. Things that appear on a computer in a word processor tend to look more final somehow, or as though they should be more final. So we start to criticize them, we start to use backspace, we start to cross things out, change things, modify as we're writing. So if you cover your computer screen, the idea is you just have to keep writing. You can't see what you've written. You have to keep producing, and you might enter a little bit more of a flow. I think that kind of thing could be very useful for when you are not quite sure what you want to say, but a bit of free writing would help you start to articulate it. Of course, the easier thing, I think, is to get a notebook and to write by hand. And there's a lot of research right now on how writing by hand helps you learn more, helps you remember more of what you write, of the notes that you take, and so on. I think it either works for you or it doesn't, but I know a lot of writers feel that they can write more easily when they write by hand. I think this is especially true for creative writing. So on the computer, it can be sometimes quite hard to tap into a more creative place. And by the way, scholarship is also creative, even though we don't often talk about it that way. But certainly when you're writing by hand, whether it's with pen or pencil or whatever makes you feel happy. I have a fountain pen because I'm pretentious, but I love it. Um, you have a more tactile experience. It's a little bit easier to move forward because you can't really edit very much as you go backwards. You can cross things out, but you might as well not. You might as well just keep going forward and start getting the thoughts out. So the idea there is just to keep the pen moving across the paper. And I've had a lot of writing teachers who suggest when you don't have any clue what you want to write, you run out of words, just to keep the pen moving on the page. May draw a spiral, draw some kind of squiggle, and keep the pen moving, and then continue to write. Another trick you can try, I've tried this a few times, and it's not my favorite, but some people say that it really works for them. It's called the Most Dangerous Writing App, and it's basically a website that you go to and you pick the amount of time that you want to write for. And then when you start to type, and you have to keep typing at a certain speed or else the text starts fading away. And if you use the backspace key, it starts fading away even faster. And if you either delete your own work or ponder, think, wait too much, it deletes what you wrote. So you're basically forced to keep writing for that amount of time. I find this a little bit of how can I put it, nuclear option. It doesn't necessarily produce good prose for me, but it's good if you just really just need to get yourself producing some sentences or thinking through some things. And then once you hit your time, you can save the material, you can have access to your text. So that's something to try. I think it would almost work better if you tried it for a longer period of time, because if you are just writing for 5 minutes, then you don't lose very much either. But if you were really writing for a while, you might actually not want to lose something in that prose. And finally, a really good tip for getting started, and one I love and I find actually really works, is to set a ridiculously, stupidly, hilariously low expectation for every single day. This is something that people who research habits or read a lot about habits suggest. The idea is to use very small habits, or tiny habits, some people call them, to develop the habit, right? So instead of saying I'm going to exercise for an hour every day, you say I'm going to do one sit-up every day, period. Or people even suggest flossing one tooth just between two teeth, rather than saying I'm going to floss all of my teeth every day. So the idea with this kind of habit building is that you actually also have to be happy if all you do is that ridiculously low expectation. So I suggest something like writing 3 sentences, or even writing 1 sentence, or writing for 3 minutes, something just stupid where you wouldn't think it would make a difference at all. If you then feel like continuing to do the thing, keep doing the thing, keep writing. If you are just having a terrible day that day and you can't concentrate and nothing comes, you have to say to yourself, if I did 3 days, I can check this off on my calendar as a day where I did my work. And you have to make your peace with that. And strangely enough, if you do that, it actually works a little bit, because most of the time you don't write just for 3 minutes, but there will be those days when you really can't produce anything. It just isn't working. But the fact that you've connected to the project and you've written a little bit will make you feel better and will make it easier to come back the next day. Okay, so those are sort of the quick start tips. Of course, if you are working on a longer project, it's not just a matter of getting started writing every day, especially at the beginning when you might not have very much to write. But there is the challenge of just keeping going, right? And whether that's a BA thesis or a doctoral thesis or a book or any kind of longer project that really takes stamina and organization, I think even a seminar paper can require that kind of discipline. and substantial work. There are strategies you can use to make that a little more manageable. Obviously, the first one, and you will hear this from a lot of people, is to break the project down into as many small components as possible. And here again, I think it makes sense to break them down to components that are just absolutely tiny, right? And write them out in a big to-do list. I like to use Google Docs for this, but you might have something else. I like that because I can cross things off by doing very small amounts and feel that I'm making progress without having to take on a whole chapter, right? I can say, well, write the paragraph on that text. And then once I've done that paragraph, I've done something. I've gotten a little further, even though the whole big project is much larger. Another thing you can do in using your time, there are other people who talk to you about how to schedule time, putting time in your calendar for that work. I find that works for some people. Other people have pretty difficult to schedule times. Right now, a lot of us who are in isolation have kids at home, and then protecting your time becomes quite a bit more difficult. And really having chunks of your day that are dedicated to the projects can be trickier. Or if you're just living with other people and they come in and they bother you and they interrupt you. So the question is how you can use the time that you have, whether that time is at 8 in the morning or 8 p.m. at night or 3 in the morning, whatever. And the issue I found is people say write every day, but honestly, we can't write every day. If we're doing research, it might be helpful to write things out, but it might not be because we're still doing the research or we're still so early in the process that it's not really useful to write everything out. What you could do, though, is try to do what you can in the time you have and be thinking of writing not as something that is just a matter of composing prose. As a coach that I worked with, Anne Bramley, suggested this to me. She said, you can write every day, but don't think of writing just as composing prose. You can also be reading for the project or taking notes or gathering some bibliography or free writing, right? You could do all of these things and or revising, right? Revising something you've done the day before. These can count as writing even if they don't feel like writing. And then you can actually do work on your project every day, but it might not always look the same. So that's one tip, is just do what you can when you can. And if you're exhausted, maybe you can go on a library website and download some articles or find some bibliography. Maybe that's all you can do that day. But that'll prepare you for a day when you're feeling better, when you can actually read that material, take notes on it. Another thing I found really helpful is breaking up the process of writing so that you're not starting with a blank page. And I've done this a lot more recently. I found it really helpful, especially for the issue of concentration. Instead of maybe marking up a book and then, or an article, and then starting to write based on my scribbles, right, and my marginalia and my underlining, one thing that you could do is mark up the thing you're reading as part of your research, or if you're doing a review or something like that. Copy out those notes by hand, including the quotations. And as you copy, allow yourself to start commenting on them as well. Then type all of that up again. Type up the quotations, type up your own notes. You might find that more things occur to you, and then you can write up more notes in response. And then when you start to go to either organize these segments into a structure or even to write, you'll find that you've already been doing some very informal writing around your notes, and you've been thinking about it in all of these different steps. So now you're no longer starting at zero. I find that very, very helpful for times when it's very hard to concentrate, because it's easy to copy out notes into a book, and it's easy to then type them up. But as you're doing so, you're always thinking about the ideas again, and you're starting to have more of your own thoughts and ideas and response, criticisms, whatever, and you can start to build on that in a kind of commentary method. It's very medieval. And then finally, is a tip that I just suggested, was the idea to to just connect with a project on a regular basis. Sometimes that might mean once a week for a longer project. It might not be every day, or you have to decide what works for you. But it is true that the more often you have some kind of productive connection with your project, the easier it is to come back to it after a dry spell. So if you feel like, oh, I haven't worked on this thesis in a month, it can be very hard to come back and work on it again. But if you know that you last looked at that material 6 days ago, you can get over that hump a little more easily. How to keep going. Good strategy, Umberto Eco gives this advice too, he must be right, is to write what you feel like writing. And that will actually often not be the introduction. And in fact, I suggest you not begin with the introduction. The introduction ideally should have material you've thought about a great deal, and you should know what your argument is. And you rarely really know that when you begin writing. You could write a placeholder introduction if that makes you feel good and it gets you started. But I'd suggest that you feel free, especially with a bigger project, to pop around and write wherever you feel like writing. Another tip I find that really works, one second, is not to keep a to-do list of all the things you have left to do, but to keep a log of everything you've done. You can do it in a nice little notebook. You can write the number of words that you've written, or maybe the number of words you've revised, edited, notes you've typed up. You can count those too. And that can actually, over time, make you feel really good because you see that you're doing something. Or it could be, got bibliography on this or read 2 articles, whatever. That's actually a really interesting tip from a woman called Jocelyn Glei, who has a podcast called Hurry Slowly and all kinds of interesting productivity tips. And it changes your perception a little bit because the problem is, as she puts it, when we do so much on the computer, we don't see what we've done. We might have typed up 30 pages, but it's all digital, so we don't really feel that we've typed up 30 pages. Whereas if you start making a list of what you've done, you start to make it a little bit more graspable, and you realize you are capable of doing work and producing material and producing writing. Another idea also from Jocelyn Glei is to decide the night before for the next day 1, 2, or maybe 3 things that you really want to get done that next day. That will make it easier when you wake up in the morning to know what your main goals are for that day. You don't have to be wondering, should I work on this or should I work on that? You need to know what is the thing that is the most important for you to do that day, ideally on your project. And that will make you happy and satisfied once you finished it. That afternoon you can actually take a break and say, okay, I've done this for the day. This is one of the tricky things both about writing and about working at home, that we have no clear time when our work ends. We could always work more, but you really sometimes need to stop while you still have some energy and not exhaust yourself. And finally, for this slide at least, one tip I have, it could go in any of the other categories as well, but I find it very useful for a longer project, is to write your ideas in a letter or in an email to someone. If you're my student, you can write them to me. I used to write my own doctoral advisor these long emails about my problems with the chapter I was writing. And by the time I had written the email to her, I'd kind of worked it out. I don't know why that works better than just writing it on a piece of paper for yourself. But somehow I think when you communicate to someone else, you're not trying to put things in scholarly jargon. You're not trying to make it fancy. You're just trying to communicate. And it's a little easier to get the ideas out. Okay. So I have a few tips. Again, all of those tips can work for breaking writer's blocks. But sometimes we really are in a bad way and we just feel that we cannot get to that work. We can't face it, or we sit at our desk and try to face it or face the computer and nothing comes. There are a number of tips for this. One that is very well known, and I think rightly so, though people's judgments vary on it, is called Morning Pages. It's by the writer Julia Cameron, who has sold a lot of books based on this, called The Writer's Way, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea is, in Julia Cameron's sort of formulation of this, that you keep on the big notebook, right, by your bedside or somewhere reachable in the morning. And as soon as you can after waking up, you write 3 pages. Longhand, you don't cross anything out, you don't read what you've written, not for a while or ever, it doesn't matter. And you just keep writing until you've filled up those 3 pages. Maybe you have a cup of coffee or tea first and then write them. Maybe you write them the moment you get up before you're even fully conscious. And there are different reasons why this might work. It doesn't work right away. It's not like the day you do your morning pages, you'll suddenly also be producing wonderful prose at your computer. But over time, it actually does kind of help. I think partly because you start the day out writing, and so you're already in the mood for writing, have the feeling that you can write. You've warmed yourself up a little bit. She says that one of the things you can do with it is just get your anxieties out, so that maybe the things that are worrying you, the things, the bad dreams you had, whatever's kind of weighing you down, you can get it out in those morning pages. And then when you approach your desk to do your proper writing, you're not thinking about those things because you've gotten them out. It's a kind of journaling or brain dump, if you like. But I think it's worth trying. I think it's worth trying for more than one day. I do it sometimes, so I don't do it all the time. But when I have phases when I realize like I need to start to be productive again, I start doing the morning pages again. And one of the weird things is that it makes me remember my dreams. Don't know why. Otherwise, I never do. But when I do morning pages, I always remember my dreams. A lot of people go for a walk. So going for a walk, any kind of physical activity, but walking is particularly good. I suggest taking a notebook with you. So after you've worked for a while, maybe in the early afternoon, just go for a long walk if you can, if you are allowed to right now. And maybe it's the fresh air, maybe it's the movement, maybe it's looking at things from different angles. You might start to work out some of the problems that you had in your writing while you're walking. Similarly, I just suggest taking a lot of showers or just extending your morning shower. I find that a lot of solutions come, intellectual solutions come in the shower. I think it's also maybe a lot of oxygen, or maybe it's being relaxed, but showers can be very helpful as part of the writing process. So if someone has a problem with your 45-minute shower, tell them it's a necessity for your work to be done. One thing that works for some people, but not necessarily for others, maybe a little bit like the shower and the walk, is meditation. And here there are a lot of videos on YouTube that you can find for short breath meditations. You could even do 5 minutes of closing your eyes and just paying attention to your breath going in and out. Some people I know don't like meditation, have a terrible time with it, get anxiety attacks from it. If that's you, obviously leave this. But for a lot of people, even just a few moments of quieting down, closing their eyes, breathing in and out, feeling their body, right, being in place, helps them calm down a little bit and start to reach something a little more creative inside of themselves. And I think that's also helpful for the kind of clarity we need when we put together a scholarly argument. Okay, so all of those haven't worked. You're still absolutely miserable. You can take a little of the control out of your own hands. You can write down all of the sections that you have to work on little slips of paper, put them in a jar, set a Pomodoro for 25 minutes, and just pull one out at random and start writing about it for 25 minutes. Free writing is fine. It doesn't have to be nice. That, I've tried it and it's actually really neat. It works quite well because somehow the fact that you don't know what it's going to be in advance means that you can't prepare for it. You can't worry too much about it. You can't already have the idea and already say that it's bad. You just have to just write about this thing for 25 minutes. Maybe what comes out is useful. Maybe it isn't, but you can be writing, right? And then another trick I've learned is, it's a very silly trick, but it sometimes works, is to count down from 5 and then do the thing when you hit 1. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm starting, right? Useful for all kinds of things you might want to avoid, but you actually should be doing. Hard for a really big thing, it's hard to use for an hour, but sometimes if you just need to get started, you can just count yourself down like a spaceship or something and not be thinking in that time. Just count yourself down and know that you start when you hit 1 or 0. One thing that is a tip that also has to do with short-circuiting your inner critic. And I present this, I think it works. It definitely works for some people. I think it might work for me too, but I'm not sure, is to write at the time of the day that feels wrong for you. So often we might be night owls, or we might be early birds. We might feel better, clearer, crisper, more capable of concentrating at a particular time of day. But the idea is that at that time of day, also your critical mind is very strong as well. So the tip is to write a little bit when you're not fully awake, when you're actually kind of tired. If you're an early bird, then in the evening. If you're a night owl, then early in the morning. I find this a little bit tricky because sometimes I really do need my full brain to produce something I like. But maybe for free writing, it could be very good, just so that you're not judging your own ideas as they come up, so that you could just start to write them out. Then I think it can really help being a bit tired. And I wonder if that's also why all-nighters, for people who are young enough and can still do them, why all-nighters are really good. Because at some point at 4 a.m, nobody's really thinking clearly anymore. So at that point, you're not questioning what you're writing. You're just writing. You're just getting it out. So I think there might be something to this tip. One very helpful thing, especially right now that we're in isolation, is to set a date on Skype or Zoom with someone to write together. The same way that you might otherwise decide to meet up in a coffee shop or in a library to write together, have a sort of hardcore writing session. You can do that online as well. And I like this on Zoom especially. I do this with someone on Zoom on a regular basis because we turn off our videos and our sound. We mute ourselves at the same time. So we actually can neither hear or see each other while we're writing. And yet the knowledge that the other person is there, we've checked in with each other at the beginning, we're going to check in with each other again at the end. There is something magical about it. I don't know what it is, but it makes the writing come out. So I've started using these Zoom dates for starting a new piece because I know that for some reason, if I'm writing with another person and we've made that date and we've decided this is our writing time, even if it's just 1 hour a week, I will write then and things come out. It's magic. So I highly suggest that, and actually making that a regular kind of thing, even if you have to change the date or so on, or even for half an hour. I think you can write a lot in half an hour. You have no idea how much you can write in half an hour. Or you can use it, you don't have to write prose. You can do a brain dump of all of your ideas or all of your questions about a project, and then use that as the basis of the next day's work. Finally, I think I'll close on this. Another tip that I think you can use is to write down a list of all the reasons why you shouldn't do the thing that you're working on. And I think this is useful because sometimes we think about procrastination only in terms of discipline or time management, self-control, work ethic. And I don't really think procrastination or writer's block, whatever you want to call it, resistance, I don't think it actually has to do very much with those things. Certainly there's a factor, but usually, especially if you're the kind of person who is relatively good at what you do or you have been up until now, there's usually a psychological reason for why you might be a little bit unwilling to do this work, right? It might mean stepping into a new phase of your life. If you're finishing your thesis and you don't know what's going to happen afterwards, right? Finishing that thesis then means you're going to have to face the unknown, right? That can be uncomfortable. It might be that a piece of writing is scary for you for some reason, or might be divisive if it's a piece of public writing that you're doing, or you might be afraid of failure, of people criticizing it once it's out. You might be afraid of success, or what it means when you've achieved something and your friends or family might not be as happy for you as you might like, or it might divide you from them in some way. So sometimes I think it's good to face those psychological reasons for not being able to progress and start writing them down. Just make a big list, give yourself 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and make a big list of all the reasons not to do this thing. You might even get ridiculous about it and do the silly ones too, right? Not to finish this project, right? Not to work on it, not to do it. Why you should quit, right? And then give yourself time to come up with the reasons to do it, or even to go through all of the reasons you mentioned and answer that. And do it in writing, write it out, ideally by hand. Just so that you can sort of work out this debate in a more articulated way in your mind, rather than just having the sort of fears and unspoken subconscious worries underneath, controlling your behavior, but not really in a way that's conscious or explicit enough for you to deal with. So, okay, these are a few tips. I broke them up into categories, but I think you can tell all of them could fit into any of the categories. You can use a Skype Zoom date to get started on a piece of writing. You can use the ridiculously low habits to break a writer's block. So it's a little bit of an artificial categorization that I've given you, but I'm hoping that you will have at least one or two ideas or things that appeal to you, that seem easy, that seem doable, that maybe seem fun, that you can try out. And of course, with you can combine them, right? So you can use the Zoom date to structure your writing or to do some research. If that's the thing you've been putting it off, then get a friend who's working on their project at the same time and use that time to do the next step in your process. It doesn't have to be the writing itself. Okay, so I hope these have been useful for you. I would love to hear what's worked for you. Maybe you could even comment below this video. I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? See what's been useful for you, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. If there are other suggestions you have for ways to get further, get work done on your project, do your writing, face writer's block or resistance, and make the progress you want to make. Bye-bye.